Welcome to our backyard. This is the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We are two friends having a discussion after everyone else has passed out or gone to bed. Grab a drink and listen as we discuss everything from automation, space exploration, and why the meaning of life is 42. We're going to talk about the honeylocust, which is a tree that is all over the world, but it was shrinking because we think it was preyed upon by mammoths. And it's super interesting how it got to be distributed from its native range. But before we get too far into it, Mike, how are you doing? What are you drinking?
Well, we're talking about trees, so that should define how I'm doing. And unfortunately, I'm drinking something very appropriate. I'm drinking some Old Forester.
Well, there you go. I myself just have some Evan Williams here with me.
Huh, inflation's really
Inflation
hurting
hits
you.
hard. So, honeylocust, the scientific name is Gladitia tricanthos, and it's called tricanthos because it has thorns on it. 3 thorns, 3-toothed is what the Latin name means. And it's a super interesting tree that you've seen before. You've definitely seen their fruit. They look like really long green beans that are black, like a foot long.
I imagine if I'm looking at the grocery store, I know exactly what you're talking about. Kind of by the potatoes, kind of by the peppers, depending on your grocery store.
Well, they don't sell them in
All right, never
stores.
mind. I'm thinking of something completely different.
No, but you'll if you see them on the street, you'll know what they are. I'll try and post some pictures when this comes out. What's super interesting is this tree used to be, so it kind of was scattered in the southeast, south central, from Texas, part of the Midwest, around Illinois, kind of, yeah, and then kind of takes off on the west side of the Appalachians and down. So the honey locust is a super common tree that people plant all over, neighborhoods and cities, mostly cities where people walk on soil a lot. It can survive in pretty acidic soils. So the side of, big metropolitan areas where you have who knows what bunch of dog shit, cat shit, motor oil, whatever's leaking can get in there and the tree will still survive. But they had to first breed it without the thorns because it is super thorny and when it grows in the wild. And we don't exactly know for certain, but we think so. There's a bunch of species that have these giant fruits, and nothing that's alive today disperses these fruits. So it's just kind of weird. And yes, I mean, deer will eat these and, move them around, but it's not like their preferred meal.
Desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yeah, the seeds have been found in mammoth poop and intestines, so we know the mammoths ate them. And a picture that I saw, the thorns tend to stop about like 15, 20 feet up, about the range like mammoths push trees over. And so the thought process is that this tree grew thorns as a defense against being pushed over by mammoths before the fruits were ripe, right? Because the tree doesn't want their fruits to be taken off before they're, fully complete because it's trying to reproduce. It's trying to make those seeds fruit and then spread. But if they're eaten before, then they're not going to spread. And so this tree, since, its historical range used to be a lot bigger, but it's been shrinking because, well, mammoths don't spread this anymore. And then humans came and we found out that it could grow in all our tough places to grow stuff. And so then we started spreading it. But there's a whole bunch of different trees. Probably one of the most famous ones, like Osage orange, that has this giant fruit. And it's all these plants that they believe, well, we're going to use mammoths, but I guess the scientific word is Pleistocene megafauna, right? So all these giant animals spread all this stuff. And so what we're seeing is all this stuff that was around and adapted to survive in certain conditions, but aren't there anymore. So you have this honey locust tree, and then you have this Osage orange with this big tough fruit that everyone's like, what are these trees trying to protect themselves against? Because nothing here is preying on them. Nothing is eating this. Why do antelopes, why can they run 55 miles an hour when there's nothing there that chases them? Well, it's because antelopes used to have, the American leopard, or what is it, lion, cougar, some giant cat that chased them. And so I think it's just crazy that we're for a long time we're trying to figure out what are these animals defending against. Well, it's something that they've adapted to live with for so long that's no longer there, but they still have these adaptations.
Is it bad? Like, nature is really good at PTSD. Like, you eat enough times, you learn a trait, you'll never forget that trait.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have all these so it doesn't, antelopes, their defense mechanism isn't hurting them, but you have all these trees that, well, where their fruits were normally scattered by these giant things that aren't being scattered anymore. So over time, like, their area they grow is only shrinking, right? Because their fruits fall off and they fall right next to the tree and nothing's really moving them. And so you're going to see a continued shrinking of these areas, again, outside of the fact that we're planting these everywhere, but we're not planting the original, natural genetics of these everywhere. We're planting domesticated versions. And so it's like witnessing a slow motion. I mean, I guess all extinctions are kind of slow, except some are very rapid.
Unless a meteor comes.
Yeah, unless a meteor comes. But we're like watching these trees slowly disappear. Obviously, there's, plans, state and federal are working to maintain the populations, but in a pure natural landscape, you would just see a continued shrinking of these species because they're adapted for a world that they no longer live in, which I think is just crazy. And like, there's, you can eat, some people I think can eat some people have eaten these, but they're not like a main meal for anyone.
They're not a
like, it's just
desired
kind of
meal.
like a cool thing. And so you're just getting less and less, and over time we're going to have less and less of these. And I just thought it was cool just to, I think about this tree all the time. I think it's one of the coolest, non-conifer tree. I had to throw that out there, but because every time I see it, I just think about, man, like, this tree is from a time when mammoths like were around. And obviously I've never seen one in the wild because I live in the Pacific Northwest, well outside of their range. And so I really want to see one of these fully thorned up in the wild and just kind of think about, man, like, imagine having to defend against mammoths as a tree, right? Like, you can't move. So you have to evolve something that can stop these mammoths from destroying it, because a tree takes 20, 30 years to grow, and maybe I don't know how long it takes a mammoth to push over a tree, but probably not very long. I mean, they just put a foot up, right,
I do have a question.
and push the tree
How
over.
big are these spikes? How thorny? Are we talking like full coverage? Are we talking kind of like barbed wire? Are we talking like, what is the like thorn size? Is it like a pencil? Is it a needle? Like, what are we looking at?
Imagine like an inch long needle with three of them coming out and then just kind of all over the tree. I'll send you a picture, but it's enough that, like, you're not going to climb it. You're going to look at it and not want to touch it. Pretty. It kind of goes all around the tree. It gets starts a little bit above the base and taps out about 20, 30 feet.
For those listening, the best way I can describe this is, think of an edge of a branch in the dead of winter. All the leaves are gone, and all exposed are the small twigs at the end of it. And that's what it looks like, but they're thorns. I would say they extrude maybe 8 inches off the trunk, and they kind of look like, old-fashioned barbed wire in one sense or another. Not as many prongs as one might think, but Definitely enough where you wouldn't want to stick your hand into it. And I would have to say twigs is about the right diameter. It looks like it varies across the trunk. And this is just a non-tree expert trying to help the other laymen's out there.
Yeah, no, that's the hard part about doing a podcast about something you're trying to look at. So I sent you another picture, and this is the one that I'll post on social media. It shows the tree, and then it shows the thorns, and it has a
very specific
picture.
Area. The picture he sent me, which we'll put on Instagram, is they developed thorns at the exact. Imagine an elephant, and right at where the shoulders and the top head are, down to the knees, is only where the thorns are. This is very specific of just to. This is my enemy. I will only guard against this enemy. If a beaver came along, I don't give a fuck. But mammoths, I give a fuck.
Yeah, and then, so another one of these fruits trees that is protected because of large predators, or not predators, large herbivores, is the avocado. So every time that you have to get out an avocado, I'm trying to remember what animal it was that they're protecting against. Giant sloths were the ones who were targeting the avocados. So every time you have to wrestle for that avocado, get that heart out of there, that was just a defense mechanism for giant sloths.
Good to know.
And then Kentucky coffee tree seed pods. That's another species that is adapted for species that aren't here anymore. But yeah, the Ohio State University has a really cool article called Honeylocust and Mastodons that talks about all the different stuff and why, what species were here are adapted for stuff that no longer exists. Which I think is just crazy because obviously there's no more mastodons, but everyone's always like, what did the world look like? Well, a lot of those plants are still here.
Nick, I'm not gonna lie. My first instinct is if we bring the mammoths back, we have the trees.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure they eat a ton of different stuff, but this is just part of it. As herbivores, they probably seasonally move around. But yeah, it's just crazy. I don't know. Something I'm super fascinated by.
Well, it isn't. To me, the most intriguing part about it is how specific where the thorns are grown. On the height off the ground to a very specific height up the trunk. It's very specialized.
Yeah, and again, this isn't settled science. Like, some people don't think that this is a mammoth defense. Some people do. I think it is, especially. And so one part, you have like you said, the needles that protect where the mammoth is, and second, there's nothing alive today that this thing needs needles to protect against. And mammoths have been found to eat these. Now, could it be like deer where they'll eat them, but it's not their favorite? Maybe. But it seems like a very specific defense. Could it be like a sloth or something? Maybe. But you think they could just get above that from another tree? It seems very mammoth specific. I mean, we may never know. We'll probably never 100% know because until we bring a mastodon back, we don't have any way to test it. But it seems like a good reason to bring a mastodon back.
Well, you don't have to convince me. I'm down to bring that back, and if it involves trees, I will suffer through that.
So yeah, just just go about your day, and just next time you see one of these trees, think about the predators they had to defend themselves with. And if you take anything away from this, it'll probably be giant sloths are the reason avocados are so hard to eat. So at least you learn something you can talk about with other people. Thanks for listening to the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We rarely finish a podcast without missing a point we wanted to bring up, so let us know what we forgot. And if you have a topic you want us to talk about, let us know at Backyard Philosophy on Instagram and Backyard Philosophy Podcast